Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Hi, I'm Renee Hobbs, and welcome to tonight's webinar. And the webinar tonight is entitled YouTubers as Change Agents for Media Literacy. And I'll admit it, I wasn't sure there was such a thing as a change agent for media literacy until I stumbled across the work of Tiffany Ferguson and her internet analysis series just blew me away with its creativity and erudition. And so, Tiffany, we are so delighted that you're joining us here for a dialogue, a Q&A, and all the rest. Thanks so much for participating in this event tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited, a little nervous, very flattered that you enjoy my series.
Well, absolutely. And I figured I had to assume that almost everybody on the call is familiar with your work, Tiffany. But you know, there might be some old timers in the room who are not so familiar. And so I thought for them, it might be useful to introduce you by means of your series. So let's just take a look at a couple of opening moments from some of your wonderful work. How about this one? We start with this one. My screen time is out of control.
Hello, my dudes. My name is Tiffany. Welcome back to my series, Internet Analysis, where I like to research and discuss things relevant to social issues and media. Today's topic is the fact that my screen time is out of control. If I'm not on my phone, I'm on my computer. If I'm not on my computer, I'm watching TV. Sometimes I'm doing all three at once. Honestly, rather than trying to add up all of my cumulative screen times, it would be easier to count the hours that I am not on my screen, which is mostly when I am sleeping.
There you go. Or how about this one? Another really charming and interesting one. I'm going to capture this one in the middle in an episode called "The Normalization of Facetune is Problematic."
We can have differing opinions. But another big problem I have with Facetune is that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. When someone edits their picture, changes their body, changes their face, tries to get rid of any possible imperfection and then shares that, then it becomes not just their problem or whatever, it becomes everyone's. It shows up on other people's feeds. Obviously, we are affected by what we see in our own feeds. We are affected by what other people post. So a Facetune user may be able to handle Facetuning their own pictures. They may not be bothered by editing their own bodies, but then posting it and sharing it might trigger other people who follow them.
We're going to take some time to have a real meaningful discussion with Tiffany, and I'm looking forward to that a lot. Then we're going to have some opportunities for some small group discussion. Then there'll be a Q&A where you can ask Tiffany questions, and then we'll come back and do some synthesis and reflection. But before we begin with Tiffany, I guess, and maybe Tiffany, this first activity is for you as well as everybody. You know how they say that the internet was really created just so that we could share cat videos, right? Well, we always, at the Media Education Lab, we always start with an emotional check-in activity that involves screen annotation. So if you roll up to the top of your Zoom, you can activate the annotate link, and you can, perhaps you can draw around the cat that you're feeling today. I'm feeling a little prowly and excited, so I circled the number 5. Which cat are you feeling today? Look at all of those marvelous marks we're having. Folks are annotating and feeling all the different feelings that go along with being alive in the middle of the pandemic and getting a chance to meet a real superstar in the YouTube world, Tiffany Ferguson. So glad you're feeling the way you're feeling. Hey, Tiffany, which one of these cats, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, best captures how you're feeling?
I circled 4. I'm actually new to the annotation feature, so that's fun. You learn something new about Zoom every day.
Isn't it lovely? You learn something about Zoom every day. It's really true. Thanks so much for playing that game with me, and welcome to everyone. I'm so excited that our friends from all over the world are joining us. I guess maybe, Tiffany, the place to start really with that first question is, how did you get your first exposure to media literacy education? Because it seems like you have a lot of expertise on that topic. How'd you first begin to think of yourself as being someone who was media literate?
I can't remember the first time I heard the term media literacy. I don't remember learning it when I was young, but I've actually been on YouTube since 2007. So I've been making videos for 13 years now. So I feel like in terms of internet culture and just being a user of social media, that's kind of where I began to learn about media literacy without knowing that term. And then in university, I started out as a film major, and now I've switched to media studies. So I'm definitely more well-versed in media literacy now. But yeah, I think it just wasn't really labeled to me until really just a few years ago.
Yeah, it turns out that a lot of people are surprised to learn that they've learned about media literacy. And I think what's cool about your experience is you learned about it through making media before you began formally analyzing media. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got started and why you got started? Can you take us back to those early days and tell us about what was going on for you then?
Yeah, I was in fifth grade in elementary school, and I was the president of my student council. So I had discovered YouTube probably through like Charlie the Unicorn, some viral video, and I thought, oh, I can make YouTube videos for my school. So I started a channel called Tiffany the Prez because I was president, and I didn't end up making any kinds of videos for school or anything, but I did just start experimenting with making videos. Back then I was recording on my mom's like Razor cell phone. So it was very, very low tech, but it was really cool to try it out. And, you know, I was just like any other young person or middle schooler who wants to make silly videos for yourself or your friends.
And you kept it up since 2007. So that means that you must have a powerful love and a love-hate relationship maybe with being a YouTuber. What do you love and what do you hate about being a YouTuber?
Well, it's definitely changed over the years. I think during the years where my growth was really slow, which was honestly most of my YouTube journey, I would get a little bit frustrated sometimes that, you know, my channel wasn't growing fast enough, and you just get like in creative slumps, and it's hard to keep making videos when you don't feel inspired. But in the last few years, since this has been my actual job, it's definitely a very different experience. I try to appreciate the fact that this is like a very lucky position to be in, and also I try to appreciate the community that has formed around my videos. That's definitely the best part, is like all of the feedback and like even just reading the chat. I want to sit and talk to all you guys right now. For me, some of the worst parts are like definitely when I'm not feeling motivated or creative. That's really hard because I'm still expected to make content regularly. And then I've also been trying to manage like criticism of my videos, because my videos are critical, so it makes sense for that to be kind of a back and forth, but it's still hard like on a personal level to handle comments sometimes. So sometimes I just don't look at them and I try to ignore it.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. I love this idea that you love that an online community has formed that's in discourse with you, that they are conversing with you. There's a give and take to that. But of course, sometimes the anonymity of the internet and the power dynamics that happen, the mean-spiritedness of comments, that can really be a drag, and it can be hard to ignore those things. Now, can you tell us a little bit about what got you started to create the Internet Analysis series? I was so thrilled to read that series, I believe, and your role as a commentator is what got you nominated for the Streamy Awards, right?
Yeah, that's been very exciting. It's funny because I nominated myself last year, or I sent in I think you have to like submit yourself and then you'll be considered, and I was not nominated last year, so it was a surprise this year, and I'm honored to be nominated alongside literally all of my favorite creators. So it's, yeah, very flattering.
Yeah. So how did you decide to create the Internet Analysis series?
Right. It was actually an accident. I was in one of those times where I felt very unmotivated and didn't know what videos to make. And then suddenly I made a video. I believe it was one about Joanna Sadia, who's a young blogger who blew up, within a couple of months. So I just sat down and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to talk about this channel and like I want to try to figure out why it blew up. Was it the algorithm? Like what made this person so successful so fast? And then that video did well with my audience and people were like, hey, you should do more of this. So then I kept going and I accidentally said like, oh, like I'm going to make another internet analysis type of video. And then I ended up being like, oh, that's a good name. I'll stick with that. And then it ended up just being like completely like my entire main channel is now dedicated to the series.
Interesting, interesting. So in a way, you were looking for ways to speak to an audience, a bigger audience, and it turned out that your critical commentary on all aspects of internet culture really captured people's imagination. Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite episode from your internet analysis series? One that you're especially proud of, or one that was especially meaningful to you?
There are so many. I feel like I think of them in like eras. So like I think last year, 2019 was definitely my best year in terms of growth and subscribers and views and stuff. And there were definitely some videos that year that I'll look back and watch because I do watch a lot of my own videos once in a while. And it's cool to watch something and not like cringe. It's nice to watch a video and be like, okay, I made good points, even though it was last year or however many years ago. I did a good job. Let's see. I guess I have to say You're Not Relatable Anymore because I think that's my most viewed video. And that one, I feel like when I was making it, I didn't know if people would get what I was saying. Basically, the point was like when YouTubers or influencers are too, not that they're too rich, sometimes that's a problem, but when they flex their wealth and show it off a little bit too much, they become very materialistic. My theory was like that they lose relatability and that their audience is going to start to dislike them. And that video apparently struck a chord. So that's one that I'm definitely proud of.
And it's another video that has a lot to do with this relationship between the YouTuber and his or her audience, right? So clearly you're thinking deeply about this complicated, could we call it a parasocial relationship where they know you really well, but you know them just a
Yeah.
tiny bit. How do you think
Parasocial
about your audience?
relationships are everything. I find myself in a lot of parasocial relationships with the creators I watch, and I spend a lot of time watching YouTube. I don't socialize like at all during quarantine, obviously. So it's interesting to see it from the viewer side myself, but also experience it as a creator.
Good point. Good point. So you have parasocial relationships with the celebrities and the creative talent that you appreciate. So can you tell us about some of the folks who you think you've been influenced by and whose work you especially admire?
Yes, definitely. I mention ContraPoints a lot. Natalie does video essays, and she also was nominated in the same streamy category as me, which is just surreal. Again, I'm like, we're not on the same level in my mind. She should definitely win this. But I found this part of, I guess it's like video essay. It's also called left tube or bread tube. And I think I discovered that part of YouTube last year. But it's like leftist, political content, but it's also very artistic and it's the cinematography is beautiful and there's like costuming and set design. So I love ContraPoints videos. I also love Philosophy Tube, which is kind of a similar channel. And they just create masterpieces. And it takes them all month to create one video. But when you sit down and watch it, it's usually like an hour of just like amazing content.
Yeah.
I wish I could get to that level, but like I don't have the acting or the costuming talents, so we'll see.
Well, life is long and you're young, so be patient. One of the things that we like to talk about at the Media Education Lab is how YouTube is the new educational media, right? And in certain education circles, that's a risky thing to say. But when you look at the data and you look at the evidence and when you look at the quality of the work that's produced, it's really the case that people are learning from a whole wide range of YouTube videos that are sometimes designed as educational, but more often are designed at the intersection of information, entertainment, and persuasion. Can you talk about how you combine information, entertainment, and persuasion in your work?
It's definitely a challenge. Yeah, when I think about internet analysis, sometimes my goal is just to make an entertaining video, and I can't really help but dive a little bit deeper into the research, and I end up pulling out fun facts and wanting to go on tangents, especially while I've still been in school. Some weeks, I just can't handle like a very deep video that's going to take too much time. So, I'll review a Netflix show and talk about like the social impacts of that. So I try to pull something meaningful. My printer is awakening for some reason. I try to pull something meaningful out of whatever I watch. But then sometimes I have something like, actually one of my favorite videos that's probably underrated is one on PR and propaganda and Edward Bernays. And it was literally based on like an intro to media lecture that I had in my class. And I was like, this is such good information. I need to like retell it. And so some of my videos are a little bit more like straightforwardly educational, but I also have this tone of voice that people find very sarcastic. And I think sometimes people think I'm joking when I'm not, or being more condescending than I am trying to be. So sometimes people say like, oh, I don't like your attitude. And I'm like, it's just the way I talk. This is just the way I present information, and I can't really change it. But hopefully that comes across in a kind of humorous way.
That's right. I have a feeling that that is a feature of your performance style that is actually right there at that intersection, right? It's informative, and it's a little bit funny, and it's a little bit persuasive as well. But that's part of the charm of your style, is you're able to get across a lot of interesting and complicated ideas. You're able to deconstruct and take apart and respect the nuances of how meaning is shared through the careful design of images, language, sound, multimedia, interactivity, and help people think more deeply about media. I feel like, in a way, your work does help audiences understand media better. And sometimes it's because you put context around a phenomenon. So I want to reflect on how your experience kind of growing up with social media affected your ability to deconstruct and analyze it. Because sometimes people say, you can't, what did Marshall McLuhan say back in the day, right? Who doesn't recognize water? Well, it's the fish, right? So sometimes people who grow up with a phenomenon can't really notice it because it's so routine and ordinary, and yet you seem hyper aware of the impact of social media on your own behavior and on the culture at large. How did you learn how to do that? And why do I say in one video, you said you like to do that. Tell me more.
Yeah, I think just generally I'm a very introspective person. So I'm constantly questioning myself and like what things affect me and how I'm changing. So I think that naturally becomes a part of a lot of the topics that I cover, because I'll notice something that affects me and then go, oh, how can I talk about this in a larger way? And then another thing I like to do in my videos is ask a lot of questions. My videos, I think, I try to make them very accessible in terms of not being too dense or being too academic. I don't think I'm qualified to be too academic, but I do try to use language that people who are unfamiliar can understand, and I hope to explain these concepts. And then I usually don't have the answers to the questions that I'm raising, but I like to raise the questions anyway, because, well, the commenters usually help me gain a wider perspective, but also it's just something like to leave you to sit with, and then we can all just consider it, and then we might not come up with an answer at all, but that's okay.
And in fact, that's perhaps one of the key signatures of your identity as a media literacy change agent and activist. We often define media literacy by saying It's the practice of asking critical questions about what you watch, see, and read. So the questions are almost more important than the answers, right? And it's the fact that you can hold those questions and maybe even some of the paradoxes that go along with those questions, right? You can hold those paradoxes in your head together, right? And not get locked into either or thinking, not get into false binaries, but appreciate there's multiple perspectives on these complicated topics. That's definitely a media literacy competency or thinking skill that you just demonstrate just every episode. I thought maybe one time maybe for my students next semester, we'll make a chart of an episode and kind of go, what are the different moves that you make in your videos that are basically instructional practices of media literacy. So stay tuned. I might have that for you next semester.
I want to see it.
So I know that one thing I wanted to ask you about is a little bit about your creative production process. And so once you glom onto an idea, can you give us a sense of, so one thing we know for sure that when people see a 30-second commercial, they often have no idea that it took 3 months and 90 people to create it, right? After all, it was just a 30-second ad, right? So can you tell us about all the people and all the processes that are involved that we can understand your creative production process and how work gets to us viewers?
Yeah, every video is different, of course, but generally I have this very long list of video topics that I'm just vaguely interested in, and I'll return to that or add things to it as I come across things or as I think of something. So usually by the time a video gets made, it's probably been on my list for at least a few months. And sometimes I'll go and just add like one point or one question or something to look up. So it evolves very slowly, and that gives me a lot of time to like absorb the general consensus about it or different conversations that are being had. That's also a way that I shape my video, is like I do like to bring up or respond to the way that people are already talking about an issue. Whether I agree with it or not, I think it's interesting to highlight. And then the actual research process, sometimes I'll write like an outline and then I kind of have to go back and fact check myself. So I'll say, oh, I thought this was a point. And then sometimes I'm proven wrong, or sometimes that leads me down another tangent. So my outline and my script grows, and then I have to try to organize it to make sense, hopefully. And by the time I'm actually filming the video, I've probably spent over a week studying it. And then I wonder if it even makes sense anymore, or is it worth talking about? But that's just, once you work on something so long, it can be a little bit tiring, let alone after days and days of editing and watching it over and over. But by the time I finish it, I'm like, you know what? There it is. It's done. I'll let the people judge it, and then we have to move on to the next one, because like mentally I'm maxed out on that topic. And then usually I end up promising like, oh, maybe I could explore this part. Let me know if you want a part 2. And I almost never return to it because I have to wait and it goes to the list. Someday I might cover those topics, but who knows?
Actually, I think that there's a really important insight about creativity that's embedded in your work process. And well, that is that you can't be too much of a perfectionist, right? Because nobody would ever publish anything, right? Nobody would ever write anything. Everything would always stay in a drawer if you didn't have the courage to say, well, this is good enough. I'll put it out in the world and see how the audience reacts to it. So I can totally relate to that feeling of like, I'm so sick of it now. I just have to move on, right? Move on and handle another topic. So I think that's a really great feature of your creative style, and it's probably what's going to make you very productive in the future. Now, my last question to you before we open it up for the fans and the viewers to ask you questions is, what's one thing that most people don't understand about YouTube or YouTubers that you think they ought to know?
Wow, a big question. Something that just popped into my head very quickly is just, I mean, I think most people know this, but I think it needs to be emphasized. I guess like the mystery of the algorithm. of course, anyone who creates content online wonders, like, what can I do to make the algorithm like me? How can I go viral? How can I be more successful? And I used to wonder that. I still do, of course, with every video. You know, what can I do to make this video perform well, whatever that means. And I wish people talked about, or like popular creators or successful creators, I wish that it was acknowledged more often how much luck plays into that, because like my videos that have done well over the last year or two, it's just due to the algorithm. I make the same video, whether it gets 1,000 views or 1,000,000, but sometimes the algorithm picks it up and then it, you know, has a life of its own. So I don't know, I guess I wish people, like, on one hand, hard work is important. You have to work hard to be successful, mostly. But work doesn't necessarily correlate to the success of your video performing on a platform like YouTube. So if you're a small creator or you're getting started, like, don't be discouraged by the numbers, because it's kind of random and it's kind of a numbers game. Like, I made probably 1,000 videos before I even hit 100,000 subscribers. So like, sometimes it just takes making so much content, and then some of those videos do well, and then you'll grow. But it's very random.
Hmm. What's your take on? I saw a statistic the other day that said that when you ask every 10-year-old what do they want to be when they grow up, they all want to be YouTubers. Is this a good thing, a bad thing, or what?
It worries me a little bit, because I just wonder which YouTubers kids are watching. And based on a lot of the content I've seen for children, these family channels or like kids toy channels, or even someone like Jake Paul, which I don't think should be watched by children. It worries me the types of videos that they're watching, because a lot of those are hyper materialistic, and sometimes it's like completely fake or scripted content that they pretend is real. So it can be very confusing for kids. And I would say being a YouTuber can be a cool job, but it's also very difficult, I think, emotionally and creatively. And also the chance of you like succeeding in that way is not high. I still think it's worth pursuing as a fun hobby, because that's what I did for like a decade before I made any money from it. But it worries me that kids might think they can start vlogging and then buy a Lamborghini and a mansion in LA, because that's probably not going to happen. And is that really a good goal? No, but making good content, sure, why not?
Yeah, exactly. If we think about the YouTubing as a form of creative expression that allows people to form communities and to connect with each other in communities that interest them, then yeah, you're right. Maybe the answer is really why not? Okay, so here's how we're going to do the questions. We're going to break you guys up into groups, and we're going to have you in your small group work for about 8 minutes or so. Introduce yourself to the people in your group and see if you can focus on this question: how can YouTubers be change agents for media literacy? And then, of course, you can keep track of some questions. You can practice and generate some questions that you might want to ask Tiffany when we come back, right? So you'll get a chance to talk over your questions in a small group and talk about the larger and more, I think, more powerful question about how can YouTubers like Tiffany be change agents for media literacy? And then when we come back, we'll talk with Tiffany and we'll answer all your questions. So right now the rooms are opening, and I'd like you to join that group, meet some new friends, have a great conversation. We'll see you back in about 8 minutes. Shamika, what's your relationship with Tiffany Ferguson? How do you know about her work?
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. I actually watch her. I've been watching her on YouTube for like, I'd say a year now. But I myself actually have been dabbling in the idea of like doing kind of online creation and things like that.
Uh-huh.
I'm actually super into like the idea of educating people on like sustainability and essentially all of the bad things we're doing to the environment and how we could not do that. But yeah, I think her videos are super interesting, and exactly the idea of like questioning our current reality and the current state of how I guess media around us even works is like super important, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
sharing. Yeah, that idea of learning of promoting that questioning attitude, it's going to be essential if we're going to make the planet livable, sustainable.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's really a great way to think about how you might use the power of YouTube culture and YouTube creativity to deepen people's appreciation of that. Greta Thunberg, of course, the Swedish activist, she's pretty amazing as an activist, but she doesn't use YouTube, does she?
I think actually with her situation, it's interesting that she doesn't need the media to do what they're doing. And they kind of like hound her to a point where it's like a little disrespectful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Oh, absolutely. And I feel like in a way, anybody who gets the public eye has that risk. Even Tiffany said that to us, right? That she
Hmm.
has haters and comments that are hurtful. And
No, I definitely think that's part of why I myself have not done anything yet, because I think that's a big question in my own head. Like, how am I going to be able to cope with, because I have my own mental health issues, like, how are you supposed to cope with that amount of information coming towards you, that amount of criticism coming towards you as an individual?
yeah,
It's quite a lot to deal with.
yeah, that might be a great question to ask her
Hmm.
when we come back.
I
Mia,
should
Chu,
definitely write that down before I forget.
write that down. That's a good one. Mia,
Yeah.
Chu, Kayla, what questions might you be interested in asking Tiffany, and what's your relationship to her?
I don't have much, I don't really have questions. I was just here because I'm just genuinely a fan of Tiffany, because I really enjoy her content, because she really brings new perspectives that I would have thought, for topics that I never thought I would be interested in as well. And I just love that her main focus is like critical thinking, and to ensure that she's not being as biased as possible, which I appreciate. So I'm just here to support her and, see what she has to say.
Do you know, you just made a point that I think could make a really good question to Tiffany. She does manage to offer a critical perspective without it coming across as being biased. That's what you just said. And I feel like that's one of the things that I like about her work too. She seems to show you multiple points of view about a topic, so she don't feel like she's telling you what to think, right? It's more like she's
Yeah, it feels
opening up
more
ideas.
like a discussion, yeah,
Yeah.
rather than a debate. It's really refreshing, especially in this type of era where everyone is either wrong or right. But what about just a discussion and questions?
Such a great point. Oh, I hope you find a way to craft that into a question when we get back to the large group. That's so good, because she doesn't seem like she's got a bias. She doesn't seem like she's contributing to polarization, right? And like you said, it's more like a discussion. And in discussion, we try to understand each other's points of view. And I think she does try to do that in a way. Remember the video she did on the Karen meme? Oh my God, that was so controversial. And yet she got across a lot of different points of view about that topic. Mia,
And she was not mocking whatsoever. And I just really appreciate it. I mean, of course, I don't want to say that everyone hates the Karens, but I'd say a majority would. But she just didn't come across as disrespectful, which is what makes her such a refreshing content creator.
Yeah, I totally agree. Mia, Chu, do you have a perspective on Tiffany that you want to share with us in this small group?
Hi, my name is Chu, and I'm a fan of Tiffany's work. I've been watching her work for about 1 year now, since I discovered her last year. And from where I come from Malaysia, and I think there is a lack of there is a gap between your high school or secondary school education, the gap between that and when you enter university. So we didn't have much of a focus in critical thinking when we were in high school, but when we jump into university and it's surrounded by academics from all over the world, critical thinking is warranted, but it's not really instilled in our thinking, I would say. And I think in the age of internet and YouTube era, I think having creators like Tiffany who is not really focusing on sounding super critical like what you have in the academic world, I think it really helps younger people to sort of cultivate this culture of thinking critically, being able to ask yourself questions and prepare them mentally and also intellectually before you enter university. So I think the accessibility of information itself is what really captured me as an audience. Yeah.
Boy, I really appreciate that point, and I completely agree with you that that gap between high school and college is severe, right? As everything in high school is all about the test and the test and the competition and the test, and then you come to college and they want you to think for yourself, and it's like, well, but they haven't let us do that.
Yeah, I think in college there is like this pressure to sound smart, but you don't even know how to think yet.
Exactly. But in a way, she models that practice in a way so beautifully. What a great,
Yes.
we only have 1 minute, Mia. How are you related to Tiffany? What's your connection? Maybe she'll tell us, maybe she'll not. Okay, so I'm counting on the
Hi.
3 of you to give some feedback when we go back to our main room. I'm gonna close all the rooms and we'll have about 60 seconds to come back. Mia, are you a Tiffany fan?
Um, kind of. I've watched some of the videos, not all, but I just really like the way she approaches things, and it's definitely not like she's like dispensing wisdom. It's like, oh, here's how she approaches thinking about this topic, and it's sort of like the others were saying, like modeling critical thinking that we did not get in school.
Yeah. Yeah, such a great insight. And she does it in a way that seems not pretentious. She's not faking it. She's not phony. She's just a regular person. But she's smart, right? And fearless, right? So, all right, we'll go back to the main session and see what other people have to say. Thanks for talking to me in this session, you guys.
I think you're still on mute.
Oh yeah, hey, you're back. I think you're back. You're back. You're back. Wow. Well, I don't know about you, but I had an awesome conversation with the people in my room. Let's just do a thumbs up around the room. If you had a good conversation, if you had a medium conversation, great. If you had a lousy conversation, go like that. Just tell it like it is. Did you have a good conversation? Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing. I'm glad to hear that you did. Okay, so now it's our Q&A time, and that means you get to put your question into the chat room. It might be a question or it might be a comment, but you've had a chance to think a little bit about what makes Tiffany Ferguson's work so special, right? So Tiffany, let's start with you. What happened in your room?
Well, I talked a little too much, but that's typical of me. Once you ask me a question, I start rambling. What did we talk about? Oh, we talked a little bit about specifically the issues that women face online, especially in kind of more male-dominated genres like gaming. And I had just mentioned how I've been lucky that my audience is very kind, and I've never really experienced those darker consequences of like, well, not consequences because nobody deserves this, but having death threats or like really terrible harassment. I've never experienced that, knock on wood, but it's definitely an issue that a lot of creators face, and I wish that there were more laws in place or ways to handle that other than just trying to block people, because with a really serious harassment, there's not really many avenues to take to deal with that. So it's a pressing issue.
Such a great point. Such a great point. Who's got a question for Tiffany that you'd like to put in the chat room? Or say out loud if you want to. I see a hand raised there. Athena, take it away. What's your question?
Hi, Tiffany, I love your podcast. I was just asking, what are your thoughts on like YouTubers and just people in general starting podcasts? Oh gosh.
Hi, I know I was looking for your face for a while. Hello. I'm a big fan. I'm really glad that podcasts as a medium have become so popular in the last few years. I feel like we went from podcasts being a kind of obscure thing to everyone has a podcast or wants to start a podcast. And as someone who's a fan of long form content, I'm here for it. I love it. Personally, for me, my podcast is just a very like personal outlet. So I just get to mostly rant to myself for an hour straight, which is cathartic. And it's interesting that anyone's willing to listen to it, but I'm glad that they are because it's a cool medium. But I mean, yeah, I think there's infinite space for more podcasts. I personally would love to do a different genre of podcast, a more researched one perhaps, but that would take a lot of work. And I think I'd have to be in a very different position to be able to pull that off. I'd probably need a whole team to produce it.
Hey, that could be coming though, because graduation's on its way, right?
Can't wait.
Hey, listen, here's a really great question from Casey. Casey asks, how do you think social media platforms drive changes for other forms of media? Great question.
That is a great question. That's a tough question also. Directly, I think about how social media is like literally included in media. And I thought about this recently when I was watching the Netflix show, The Queen's Gambit. If anyone's seen it, it was great. No spoilers, but I was wondering why these like period pieces are more popular or seem to be more common these days. And I think part of it is like, I find it satisfying to watch a show that doesn't include social media or doesn't include cell phones. So maybe that's part of the appeal. So that kind of doesn't answer your question. But I think to some extent we want to escape our reality of being so surrounded by social media. We want to pretend like it's the 80s or earlier, and that's not part of our lives anymore while we're binging a Netflix show.
What an interesting observation. Okay, I see some hands are up. So how about first Evan, then Amiri, and then Stephen? What are your questions for Tiffany?
Hello. So I actually very recently found your content thanks to the algorithm. And I was just sort of wondering, if you were put in charge of YouTube tomorrow, what direction would you want to take it in? And do you think it would move in that direction on its own?
Thank you, Evan, for the very difficult question. Wow, that is a tough question. I'm trying to think of like all of the bad things I would try to remove and all the good things I would try to lift up. I feel like the biggest thing is I would probably want to make changes to the algorithm to promote smaller content. I think that would be difficult though. I'm definitely not an engineer in any way. I don't know how that would work, but it would be cool if YouTube, or not even just in the algorithm, like YouTube as a platform, like homepage can go back to its roots and promote random smaller content instead of like talk show clips and, you know, YouTubers that already have 20 million subscribers. So that would probably be one of my first changes, is just let's bring YouTube back to OG YouTube and start caring a little bit more about smaller channels so that they have a bigger chance to grow.
Nice. Next up is Amiri. Amiri, what's your question?
Hi, thanks so much for your time. My question is about, I think you find yourself in a very unique position because you are a creator of content, you're an analyst of content that is made, and yet, like, I mean, judging by your screen time video, you're also very much a consumer of online content as well. So I was wondering, like, throughout the process of you starting your media studies and then eventually like becoming a creator yourself, how have those like directions of your life influenced the way that you engage with the media that is like a part of your everyday life?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's a tough one because sometimes, like I talked about in that screen time video, I sometimes wish I, as an individual, could step back and step away from social media because my screen time is still ridiculous. I am ashamed of it every day. And I'm also in Zoom classes, so it's just a lot. But obviously, as a creator, as this is my job, I have to stay not only creating my own content, but it does benefit my content to watch more videos and be on Twitter. And I should be on TikTok, but I'm still avoiding it. That's the one thing I've done well in avoiding, even though most people love it. Yeah, it's, I think I lost my train of thought. What was the question? I have 10 different tangents and I'm like, nope, delete.
I think it's actually quite insightful and you answered it perfectly. Now I'm going to move on to Steven. Steven, what's your question?
Hey, how's it going? It's good to meet you. So you talk a lot about college in your content, and you know, there's kind of like a big dialogue going on right now. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep, we can.
I'm sorry. It's saying that I'm muted. And there's sort of like a dialogue going on, especially on social media, about kind of like the viability of college right now, and just rethinking it just in general. And I was just wondering, what do you think the future of college is going to be going forward? I mean, I'm in the Zoom thing right now, and it's pretty hellish, and I can feel people like, you know, Zoom zombies and all that stuff. People are getting burnt out for sure.
Thank you. That's a great question. Well, first of all, I am glad that this is my last semester because I don't know how much longer I could stand, you know, these classes in this condition. Also, I'm just kind of burnt out in general, but I definitely feel for anyone, honestly, any age group, whether you're in, you know, elementary school, high school, college, it's a hard time to be online. So that's one part of it. But even before that, I did talk a little bit about this in my video on, I think, like low-tech schools, and just kind of rethinking our whole education system. I also made a video about the like gifted student thing and how problematic that is. And I wish that we could go to an education system that's more focused on individual needs and individual strengths and isn't all standardized, because I don't think that really benefits anyone. I talked about how I'm like a good test taker, I'm a good standardized learner, but like, what does that mean in terms of actual education or in terms of actually benefiting from what I'm learning? Like, if I can just regurgitate it, is that really a skill that's good for my life? So yeah, I hope we can reevaluate college, and I hope we can make it affordable and hopefully free, because tuition costs are just ridiculous, and it's unfair that so many people go into such deep debt for a degree.
So true, so true. Now, Reddy Martinez, I love the question that you put in the chat room. She wrote, Reddy, you wrote, do you think it's possible to admire YouTubers and also recognize that sometimes the content they create can be problematic or harmful? Before Tiffany answers, Reddy, can you talk to me about why is that an interesting question to you?
So I think that like some YouTubers that I look up to, that I looked up to in the past, have said some really controversial things, and it made me kind of question like whether I could still, I don't know, take inspiration from their previous content or the positive things that they have said. Like I don't know how to find a healthy balance between like, yeah, a lot of the stuff that you're putting out is really harmful, but you've also said some things that were helpful to me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's a good question. I find it difficult because I think when I was a smaller channel doing my commentary, it was a lot easier to be kind of brutal and like, you know, call people out for their problematic behavior or whatever. And I've found that as I grow and then I have other YouTube friends or people that I didn't think would ever find me, like contact me, it makes it a lot harder to be that critical still, because like I'm almost becoming part of this greater YouTube group almost, and I feel like that diminishes my ability to be an effective commentator. It clouds your judgment because you think of these people as peers or friends instead of like big YouTubers. So from my perspective, that's a struggle, which is kind of why I've geared a little bit away from talking about individual creators, because I want to focus on other issues. But yeah, that's part of the reason why, because I just find it hard to be unbiased, or I just wonder if that's what I want to do with my content. But even with creators that I watch, there are people that I like who have made some mistakes, and then I question my own, loyalty to them as a viewer. And again, it's so layered because I'm also a creator, or I'm also like a peer of theirs. But it's hard. I think we do have to remember that creators are people, but also I totally understand if viewers can't stand by things that creators have done, because just like people, they shouldn't be looked up to as heroes. They can make mistakes and you can cut them off if you don't want them to be part of your digital life, I guess.
Wow, great observation. So Tiffany, one thing that almost everybody is trying to figure out is the economics of being a YouTuber. And we know that we can see from your channel that you do accept paid posts and sponsorships, and you are an influencer. Can you tell us a little bit about the economics of how the YouTube business has worked for you, and how you make decisions about what kind of money is good money?
Oh man, it's very complicated. So you have your AdSense, which comes from ads on videos, and then you have sponsorships, or you could also do kind of crowdfunding like Patreon, which is like audience supported, or donations. And so I actually got a manager last year because I had before that been handling my own sponsorship inquiries, and it's just very confusing because there's no rule book, there's no like solid rate that you should charge. So I was probably definitely getting under or lowballed, I guess. Yeah. But I didn't know how to stand up for myself because I was like, I don't know. I feel crazy even asking for money to mention a thing, it still feels surreal. So having a management team is definitely helpful. But also just doing sponsorships in general, I feel very conflicted because a lot of my content is like vaguely anti-capitalist, or like I'm against materialism, but then I don't want to be hypocritical and be like, but also buy this thing. On the other hand, this is my job, and I know that it's going to be temporary, so I do want to take advantage of the earning potential while it's here, but I also don't want to sell my soul. So it's a very tough balance to strike. I've been really tempted to start a Patreon so that I can focus more on kind of being owned by my viewers or supported by my viewers, rather than being supported by corporate interests or these sponsors. I think that kind of creates a lot more of a genuine relationship. And also you don't have to worry about your sponsors not liking what you say. Your audience might not like what you say, but they can take their donations away. I definitely, I really love the creators that heavily rely on Patreon and those kind of sources, if you're lucky enough to get that kind of support.
Yeah.
Definitely not something you should take for granted, but I also enjoy, supporting other creators on Patreon because it's just a cool thing to do. It's nice to love someone's content so much that you want to give them a spare dollar if you can.
Yes, that is. It's true. And Patreon goes all the way back to the Renaissance, right? When rich people would give artists money to make their art. So it's got a noble tradition. Now we have time for just a few more questions. I'm looking at Michaela and Isabel. Michaela, do you have a question for Tiffany that you'd like to ask?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question was, unlike journalists, YouTubers aren't required to fact check the content that they put out, and YouTube algorithms oftentimes incentivize inflammatory or misinformation in content. So how can we, as a platform like YouTube and as an audience, incentivize and promote creators that do fact check and make sure they're not spreading information?
That is such an important question. I've actually spoken with a few journalists about this topic recently, kind of the question of whether commentary or drama videos can be considered a form of journalism on YouTube. I think it's an interesting thing to consider. But definitely we don't have those same standards that traditional journalists do. We don't have fact checkers, we don't have editors. So I always struggle with my own videos because I I know the responsibility, especially as my channel grows. Every video I post could be seen by hundreds of thousands of people. And so if I'm sharing misinformation or, you know, fake news or something that's not entirely correct, I understand the weight of that, and it's very stressful. Again, as an independent creator, it's hard because I only have myself and I'm not trained to be a journalist. But I do think that communities can help push creators in the right direction. You know, if you watch someone and they say something that, you know, is incorrect or harmful, I would say correct them. I think that's helpful. And often people see it in the comments anyway. So even if the creator doesn't adjust their statement, the audience might absorb it at least. It's worth a shot. I wish there was more of a process for us to fact check YouTube or something, but you know, now we have things like on Twitter and Facebook that are saying like, oh, you know, on the new Twitter feature that tells you to read the article before you retweet it. I feel like it's very condescending every time I go to retweet. It's like, did you read this though? I'm like, I will later. But yeah, it's a very tricky issue.
One of the things that came up in our small group was the idea that people felt like you didn't push your bias on us, that you shared a variety of different perspectives, and that your own multi-perspectival thinking and tolerance for complexity was kind of refreshing. But I'm going to let Isabel have the last question since we only have time for one more question. Isabel, what's your question?
Hi, thank you. First of all, I drew you during the live thing, and also greetings from Germany. My question is, media literacy makes you more critical of what media you consume and how you consume it. How do you deal with the impact on your mental health? Because the more you actually see the systemic problems, especially in media, you realize that the spectrum gets more limited of media that's actually consumable, and also it makes you more depressed, right? So how do you push through it or deal with that?
Wow, first of all, thank you for drawing me. That's great. Please like email it to me or something. But yeah, I think about that in terms of all of the media that I consume, because sometimes like on my podcast, I'll talk about like Netflix or movies that I've watched recently, and it's usually in a very lighthearted way. And sometimes I worry if I'm not being critical enough in my reviews of the stuff that I'm watching. But sometimes I feel like I have to choose whether I'm going to consume something purely for entertainment and realize that it may not be well made, or that it may be, you know, not high culture, but like I can just enjoy it, versus am I going to watch something with a critical eye with the purpose of like analyzing it. So I feel like in my personal time, I like to just shut off. I like to watch a trash show or like a bad movie. And I can, of course, think about like, you know, that was problematic, or that could have done better, or that's not great artistically. But also sometimes I just like to watch things, because yes, for your mental health, like you can't always be turned on in terms of being critical and focusing on the negative sides. I feel like I've been avoiding Twitter this week. First of all, because I bought Animal Crossing finally, so I've been busy. But also, sometimes there's so much bad news that like I just have to kind of tune out for a little bit. But it's kind of that same conflict of feeling guilty that you tune out to important news, but also like you're gonna doom scroll forever, and it's not really gonna do any good. So you just have to, you know, draw your limits.
Keshe has a beautiful quote for that in the chat, Tiffany. Have a critical mind, but not a critical heart. Let's give Tiffany Ferguson a warm round of applause for joining us tonight at the Media Education Lab. And thanks to you all for joining us. I put the link to our website in the chat room. Join us at www.mediaeducationlab.com. We do weekly events where we talk about this stuff all the time. Tiffany, you're a rock star in YouTube land, and we're so grateful you joined us for Media Literacy Week. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys so much, and thank you for inflating my ego. It's been very
Tiffany, you're fabulous.
so
I love you, Tiffany. Anytime. Bye.
That was really
Bye.
You're great. You're great.
Thank you to everyone who stayed up very late.
Thanks for your compliments.
People came from all over the world too. From Malaysia, from Germany, from Mexico, from Venezuela, from all over. What a great trip. All right, thanks a lot, you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.